everyone, this is John Daly. I'm here with another episode of the Daly Express. My guest today is a retired Army National Guard NCO from Minnesota who deployed to both Kosovo and Iraq. He was elected to county, congressional district, and state level positions in the Minnesota GOP. He later resigned in protest when Donald Trump became the Republican nominee for president in 2016. He's also a board member of Principles First. That's a grassroots coalition that we'll talk about a little bit later in the podcast. I'm talking about Dave Thul. How's it going today, Dave?
It's going very well, thank you.
Thank you. Well, thanks for joining me, and thank you also for your service. I wanted to ask you about foreign policy and how it relates to the average American. There's obviously a lot going on in the world right now. We have Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the situation in the Middle East, rising tensions in Asia. Yet I think the U.S. electorate, by and large, isn't closely tuned into those things. It kind of reminds me of how we were as a country prior to 9/11, where we have these activist movements, of course, on college campuses and whatnot, but most people really aren't paying close attention to world events and overseas conflicts. I'd argue that our political leaders don't talk about these topics enough, at least not with the level of seriousness and detail they deserve. And so I don't think a lot of voters are necessarily factoring these issues into their November vote as we prepare to elect a new commander in chief. Dave, do you think I'm right about that? Am I being too pessimistic? How much does how much does this situation concern you?
It concerns me quite a bit. Having been in the military, having been overseas, I think it is a bigger issue than it's getting play in the media. But I'm not sure if it's the politicians not talking to the issue or the voters not wanting to hear about that issue. The voters notoriously want to hear about checkbook issues. What's the famous line? It's the economy, stupid, right? They want to know what you're going to do to make their lives better. And the situation in Ukraine, obviously that stirs feelings in people, but I think that's more of a secondary issue for most voters as they're looking at it. So you're right. I think we are kind of like the country was before 9/11, more inwardly focused. You can even make the comparison. We're in 1939 America, paying more attention to what's going on inside the country than outside the country.
It's sometimes hard for me to tell with these two presidential nominees where exactly they stand and what they would do, on foreign policy matters. On Israel, Trump has always sounded pretty strong. I think he was a pretty good ally when he was president. While Harris, always feels a little more nuanced in her rhetoric, and the Biden administration, seems to get a lot of things wrong on Iran. On the other hand, Harris speaks out in strong support of Ukraine. I think Biden has done a good job, though probably not as strong as I would like. Trump, on the other hand, sounds like he might be ready to let Putin have his way. And of course, he threatens from time to time to pull us out of NATO, which I think would be a disaster. Dave, what are your biggest concerns when it comes to both nominees on matters of foreign policy?
I think you're absolutely right. The support for our allies in the rest of the world is the biggest issue I'm looking for. I would agree with you again that Trump seems to be a more staunch supporter of Israel, whereas Biden or Harris would seem to be a more staunch supporter of Ukraine against Russia, which is interesting because I don't think either one of them, Iran facing off against Israel or Russia facing off against Ukraine, I don't think they're disconnected. I think they're probably working somewhat together, and so it's interesting that the enemy of our enemy is not automatically our enemy. It seems strange that two countries could be working together, and yet our political parties have such different views on who the actual enemy is.
Yeah, it is interesting. It's just I don't you bring up a good point where they're linked, but I think there's so many similarities. I mean, I know there's differences. We have a different history, with the two, but it's there are a lot more similarities than people realize. And I think it goes on to the stuff going on in Asia too, with the threat that Taiwan is under. And um, is it? Do you understand why that people are having such trouble? Why our politicians tend to treat these situations so much differently?
Well, if you look at the two conflicts, I think the key difference has to be the sympathy that the Palestinian cause invokes in mainly in the democratic side in our country, and it's interesting that the Palestinians are portrayed as freedom fighters, as oppressed people, whereas Ukraine is not as much, right? I think it's probably that the Palestinian versus Israel issue has been around so much longer. Ukraine, although it's not a new conflict, it started in 2014. Israel versus Palestine has been an issue, well before 1947. It was an issue, all the way back even before World War II. So I think that has to be the key difference is how long that issue has been around, and how much deeper that the emotion level is for the Palestinian cause.
Now, and I wasn't going to ask about this originally, but there was a town hall. We're recording this on Friday. I'm not sure when it'll go out, but there was a town hall Thursday night, last night, with Vice Presidential nominee J.D. Vance. I think News Nation hosted it. And among other topics, he talked about Russia and Ukraine. I wanted to quote him here. He said, "Unfortunately, you got a lot of American leaders who like to beat their chest and say, this is the good guy and this is the bad guy," talking about Russia and Ukraine. Stephen Hayes of the Dispatch tweeted in response this morning saying, "Every once in a while, there's a moment that stops you. This is one of them." Vance not only fails to recognize that Vladimir Putin's Russia, after years of wanton destruction and killing, assiduously documented, is very obviously the bad guy, but he's willing to mock those. Vance is willing to mock those who refuse to deny that reality. Truly appalling. I think Hayes is absolutely right. Dave, isn't this just another reminder to people like you and me that the Republican Party we were part of a while back just doesn't exist anymore, and that top GOP leaders today are perfectly willing to throw our allies under the bus to appease a tyrant like Putin?
Yes, I think you're exactly right on that. So I got active in the Republican Party basically while I was in Iraq, or especially coming back from Iraq. And the main reason was I saw a huge discrepancy between the way the media and the Democratic Party represented our troops in Iraq and what was actual reality, right? The Democrats talked about U.S. troops as occupiers, as killers, as murderers, right? And that was not the situation that I saw when I was there, and that's what really got me off the fence and into and active in politics. So it's really strange now to hear the leaders of the Republican Party saying almost the same thing, right? That the Russia is not the bad guy, even though we can see by their actions that they are intrinsically bad. They're evil, right, in what they're doing. So yeah, it is very hard to make sense of where the Republican Party has gone with this, because Vance isn't just he isn't just voicing his opinion. He's voicing the opinion that a lot of people in the Republican Party agree with. I absolutely do not understand it.
Now, Donald Trump's another story that was in the news this week. Donald Trump's former chief of staff, John Kelly, he spoke out about some remarks. He says Trump told him as president, remarks that he made about veterans in the U.S. military. Kelly talked about how Trump said he admired some things about Hitler and how Trump wanted generals like Hitler's, people who Trump viewed as, personally obedient, kind of to the leader over the country, even.
Mhm.
Kelly basically described Trump as a fascist, as did Mark Milley. Milley, of course, was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff under Trump. And also, in this exchange, Kelly confirmed his earlier accounts of Trump referring to fallen U.S. soldiers or fallen soldiers as suckers and losers, and how Trump didn't want to be around disfigured soldiers because he thought they made him look bad. Of course, this isn't really that inconsistent with things we've all heard Trump say publicly, like his mockery of American POWs. We all remember that. Yet
Hmm.
this particular example, well, that particular example from back in 2016, I believe, um, similarly, none of this stuff ever appears to hurt Trump politically. It never really changes his poll numbers, unless with John McCain, it actually seemed to elevate his poll numbers. What do you think about the latest revelations from John Kelly?
As a rule, I usually tend to discount any claim of anything that's a he said, she said, right? One person says this, another person said that. I try to take those, with a huge grain of salt and not put too much stock in them. But what we've seen with Donald Trump is time after time after time, people saying they've heard him say the same types of things, and it defies belief that they would all be making it up or that they would all be lying. It is deeply troubling to me as a veteran that our former and possibly future commander in chief thinks of the military that way. It's honestly it's not too far different from how I imagine Putin in Russia thinks of his troops, right? Sending them into the meat grinder, they call it, just as expendable assets, as chess pieces on the board to be traded away for whatever is best for him. I do think Donald Trump does not understand the concept of why men and women volunteer to serve in the United States military, the pride that we have for our service, and why we do it. And that is, it is deeply troubling. It's really interesting talking to some of the men and women that I served with who are Trump supporters. And they, like you said, they don't feel the impact of those comments. They don't. They're not turned off by it. They usually say, "Oh, that's just talk. You can't listen to what Donald Trump is saying. You got to listen to what he does, right?" But it's hard to understand how you can have somebody saying something so clearly, disrespectful about veterans and about our service, and not see that for what it is.
Yeah, it sort of strikes me similar to you have all these police organizations, police unions that are so high on Trump, and it's weird to me, like after January 6th, and everything that went down, and Trump's refusal to step in when cops were getting the crap beat out of him by his people. Uh, that 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 doesn't seem to really make a difference to a lot of people either. It doesn't make any sense to me, but. Um, I was going to
It,
ask you about. Go ahead.
it seems to me that it's the concept of not just you tell a lie, but you tell a lie day in, day out, right? Over and over and over until people believe it. Because everybody in the country on January 7th understood what had happened, and that it was bad, and that Donald Trump was responsible for it. But that's not the popular opinion of most Republicans these days, right? It was a peaceful visit from tourists or whatever they're going with, right?
Yeah.
It's just the Trump's ability to lie, just over the top lies that we can all understand are a lie, but he says it day after day after day, and his supporters come to understand that, well, if I want to support Trump, I have to believe in that lie, and so that's just the simple math equation for them is okay. I have to believe what he says.
I saw a report the other day, and I don't know how much stock I put in it, but I thought it was sort of interesting. But there's a lot of talk about how young men are going in more, being more attracted to Donald Trump as a candidate. And one of the explanations I saw put out there was that they believe that Trump will prevent them from being drafted into the military. And I thought that was, I'm like, is that something that you've heard at all? Because I hope people realize we don't draft people anymore. But I don't know. Is that something that you think has some sort of validity to it?
I haven't heard it's a bit about not being drafted, but you certainly, there's probably a little bit of logic that says Trump is unwilling to take a stand on things that Americans deeply believe about, right? If tomorrow, if Donald Trump were elected and on day one of his administration, Russia invaded Poland, do we think Donald Trump would support NATO and would send U.S. troops to push back on that? If you hesitate to say yes automatically, then maybe there is some logic to Donald Trump would keep men and women from getting sent overseas to a foreign war, as they call it, right? I don't think it's outside the bounds of logic to think that way.
Interesting, interesting. Well, Dave, I wanted to talk to you, switch directions here about Principles First. I met you briefly back in February at the Principles First Summit in Washington, D.C. I had a blast that weekend. I thought it was very interesting, very informational. I met a lot of people I had previously only known online, and I
Mhm.
already have my tickets for next year. I'm very excited about it. You are, as I mentioned at the beginning, a board member for Principles First. You are in the planning phase right now for that event. Can you tell people what Principles First is about, what the aim of it is, and what people can expect at this year's summit?
Sure. So it's very interesting how Principles First got started. It actually got started as a bit of a Twitter fight between our founder Heath Mayo and some of the people that were attending CPAC in 2019, right? And he said that almost on a lark, well, I'll organize a counter CPAC and we'll meet across the street from you and we'll see who's more conservative. But what he did was he started organizing get-togethers around the country, right? In Minneapolis, we had a dozen people that got together, and we just kind of talked about politics, the state of the country, the state of the Republican Party. And what he found in getting these people together was there was a big desire for people to get off of social media and get together in person to talk about issues that are near and dear to right and center right conservatives. And so that led to the first Principles First Summit in 2020. It was right in the shadow of COVID. It was just before the whole world changed, but we put 500 people together in a room to talk about what had gone wrong with the Republican Party and where our country had headed. Interestingly enough, the first Principles First Summit that Saturday was and I believe it was South Carolina was the presidential primary, where we all went into Saturday thinking that Bernie Sanders was going to be the Democratic nominee, and it come out of that summit with Joe Biden, right? I don't agree with Joe Biden on many political issues, but he was a much better choice, obviously, than Bernie Sanders, right? But the summit has met every year. It's an annual event. It gets bigger every year. We're expecting 1,000 people this year, but we are really kind of modeling ourselves as the conservative successor to CPAC, right? CPAC started back in the late 1970s, and it was conservatives getting together to talk about conservative policies. But it morphed in the 90s into the crazy right wing, and it got weirder every year. It got much stranger under Donald Trump, where you see what was it last year? They had the golden calf, literally a golden idol, right? That people were paying money to go see. Principles First is all grassroots. It's all volunteers. So there's nobody paid. The cost of the ticket for the 2-day event is $50. That literally just covers the cost of the venue, right? We're not making any money off of it. There's no grift other than I think we have a couple people there that'll sell their books or autograph their books, right? That's about as much grift as there is, right? But it's great to get into a room with all these people and realize that you're not alone, right? The conservatives who still believe in conservative policies and what the Republican Party was under George Bush or Ronald Reagan, those people are still here, and we're still willing to fight for that idea of conservative policies.
And you actually hold it on the same weekend as CPAC in the same town, correct?
Yes. Yep. And that's an intentional decision. We are trying to, make a clear contrast. And in the, the news headlines over the last couple of years, it's nice to see that when the media is talking about CPAC, they're also talking about principles first because it's the two going head to head. Obviously, they're still bigger than us, but that I think that's going to change this year and in the years to come. And obviously, you don't have to take out a loan on your house in order to go to principals first, right?
Right. No, those tickets are very cheap. I was sort of surprised by that. It helped me rationalize the plane ticket to fly out there last
Hmm.
year, and it will again
Yep.
this year. Who are, and I know there's probably going to be. I was looking at the website just the other day, and I know there's going to be a lot. I'm sure there's going to be more announcements, but you already have quite a few guests, some big names that are going to show up. Can you share some of those?
I believe we just announced David Frum would be there again this year. I know we have a lot of the, I guess you'd call them the Haley Republican or the Republicans who have endorsed Haley. A lot of invites out to some of those people. We usually don't finalize the speaker list until maybe a month out, just because it's hard for some of those top tier politicians or pundits to nail down their agenda or their timeline that far in advance. But yeah, it's heavy on people that are involved with the bulwark as well as the dispatch. Right, we've got some of those people there. So yeah, it's exciting to work on the planning part of it, and it's exciting to be there and see the doors open and see all those people coming in.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Well, I'm looking very forward to it, and I want to thank you, Dave. I really appreciate you making the time for me and coming on the Daily Express. I'm looking forward to seeing you again in February, along with a lot of other people, and I hope you have a great rest of your day today.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me on. You have a good weekend.
You too. Thank you.